Administration Level 4. Today we're going straight to understanding the functions of the market. The previous three you've already done, and understanding the functions of the market will be today's topic. Let me go straight to the section outcomes. Number one is identify and solve problems using critical and creative thinking processes to solve motivational problems in relation to self and others. Number two, work effectively with others as a member of a team, group, organization, or community to create a motivating environment. Three, organize and manage oneself and one's activity responsibly and effectively in order to proactively address motivational issues relating to self and others. Collect and analyze, also organize and critically evaluate information in order to determine most appropriate motivation theories for use in own context. The section outcomes are as follows. Excuse me. Communicate effectively using visual, mathematical, and/or language in the modes of oral and/or written persuasion to implement motivational practices. Use science and technology effectively and critically, showing responsibility to the environment and health of others in outlining and evaluating action plans to enhance motivation. Participating as responsible citizens in the life of local, national, and global communities by ensuring that the motivation of self and others is sustained for effective performance. Number one, we'll start with the economic system. An economic system is loosely defined as a country's plan for its services, goods produced, and the exact way in which its economic plan is carried out. In general, there are three major types of economic systems prevailing around the world. These systems are not limited to these ones, but these are the most common ones. Number one, you've got capitalism, also have socialism and mixed-use economies. Capitalism. A capitalist system is based on principles of private property and free enterprise, with only minimal government involvement. This is the system which here in South Africa we find ourselves in. And it's very important that as we find ourselves in this system, we know exactly where our market portion is as entrepreneurs. The other system is traditionalism. It's an economy. It's an economy in which people do things the way they've always been done previously. And the other one is socialism or central planning. A socialist government takes an active leading role in structuring and directing the economy. Socialism's goals also include equalizing the distribution of wealth. The equal distribution of wealth is the other disadvantage of capitalism. It always creates the inequality in wealth distribution. The other one is mixed economy. The private sector controls many resources of production, but the government has a role in influencing the direction of the economy. Another one is the market economy. Government plays a major role and government plays a minor role in this one. Instead, consumers and their buying decisions drive the economy. planned economy or the command economy. The most important aspect of this type of economy is that all major decisions related to the production, distribution, and commodity and service prices are all made by the government. Then we come to the economic system role players. This list and that of the elements taken together provide a visual presentation of the interaction between role players in the economic system. Like, for instance, your consumers or will have a buying behavior type as determined by their following reasons. One being the motivation in purchasing. I mean, things like your normal soda, you'll just have to have a motivation to buy it on one place over the other, because normally almost all the grocery shops will have it. Secondly, as individuals, consumers have their buying habits. That means deciding how they spend their regular monies. And another thing will become their living habits, where people live normally. How people live normally has an effect on their purchasing habits. Also, the environment where they stay has got an effect on the way in which they purchase different goods. For instance, you would find that in a place like Sandton, you would find it very difficult to find a ShopRite store as compared to your Mamelodi, for example, where they might have several in different corners. Another thing is the buying power. The more money people have, the more they can buy, or the more expensive they go, depending on their choices. And the number of the products that they buy also is impacted upon by this. Supply and demand. Then the fourth one being the government behavior, which controls certain the simplest and most common one being petrol, which is regulated on the prices and the margins that can be made by different companies. Its price is area. Then you've got regulations over pricing. For example, the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, which would regulate certain products that are health related, which almost everybody uses, so that their prices does not skyrocket as a result of the supply and demand laws. So there's regulations around the prices of such products. Another example of the regulation might be the price of bread. It's also regulated by the government. Now, there are also regulations over competitive practices. And here in South Africa, we've got the Competitions Commission, which normally monitors the competitive behavior of different companies and ensure that it's done within the law and with all fairness. The role of competition in a free market system. Competition has a positive impact not only to the well-being of the consumers, but also to the country's economy as a whole. Competition bolsters the productivity and international competitiveness of the business sector and promotes dynamic market and economic growth. The most obvious benefit of competition is that it results in goods and services being offered to consumers at competitive prices. Like, for example, if you will have more shops selling a similar item around the same area, then that item is likely to get absorbed. The other ones would want to be competitive within the same space. And this results with the consumer a very good price for their product and an overall growth in the business market. Then you've got the advantages and disadvantages of competition. The advantage of competition is that it lowers prices for the end consumer. Now, with businesses fighting over each other on the price to win consumers, prices fall. Now, the disadvantage with the falling of prices is that some of the businesses do not survive that turbulence, and the business end up getting people retrenched as a result of closure, which will mean that on the business side, it also have some terrible consequences at times. Now, in overall, if you are a pro-consumer, you would want lots of competition so that you would get your product at as less a price as possible. And if you are a pro-business person, then you would want competition to be quantity supply changes. But supply does not change. When cost of production changes, supply changes, and the entire supply curve will shift. When quantity supplied at a given price decreases, the whole curve shifts to the left as there is a decrease in supply. This is generally an increase in the cost of production or decrease in the number of sellers. Now we come to reaching equilibrium. Equilibrium is defined as the intersection of supply and demand curves. The equilibrium price is the price where the quantity of demand matches the quantity supplied. Now, if you check on the graph on the right, you see the demand curve versus the supply curve. Now, the point at which these two curves meet is the point where the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. And that's the equilibrium point right there. Now, actions of buyers and sellers naturally tend to move the market towards the equilibrium. The theory of consumer choice. Consumers normally face a trade-off in their purchase decisions. Since their income is limited and choices are numerous, in order to make the choices, then the consumers must combine the budget constraints, which means deciding on what is their need, wants, and luxuries, and spend their money accordingly. Now, a change in income will undoubtedly affect the optimal choice. Changes in prices. Changes in prices have two effects. This arises from the tendency to buy less goods, of which more will be you will be buying less goods at a more expensive price. This is the substitution effect, and the income effect arises from the change in price effect in total amount that can be purchased. Now we come to the issue of influence in the economy. The Diagram you see here is the cycle which every business that operates goes through. It normally picks up and the curve goes up to the peak. The graph goes to the peak where the company is performing at its best. Then comes the recession and depression. And things like even the pandemic that we are facing right now is going to drive so many companies to recession and depression. But you'll still have companies that are still going to thrive despite all these challenges. Now, I want to ask from the class what you guys think would be the best strategy to ensure that when you start facing your recession and depression, would be the best way to ensure that your company survives. Is there anyone in class who wants to attempt answering this?
I can give it a try.
Yes, go ahead.
One can look at trying to diversify your products and not to focus only on one product within your company. For example, we've just hit recession with this pandemic recently. I heard in Plaza, what the stores there did, the stores that sells curtains, they took the material for the curtains. So basically, you also need to be innovative. So in this case, it's innovation that has made them to pull through. Because what they did then, they took the material for the curtains and then started sewing masks. And they're making a killing out of it. So the business is not dying.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Diversification is one of the most powerful strategies that so many companies that are still alive, which have been formed a long time ago, have managed to survive all these difficult times. Another one would be to the vertical integration of their businesses. So many businesses are outsourcing other activities that are not directly in their focus, but which are still in line with what they are exactly doing. Like, for example, your retailers would normally hire a completely private company to transport their goods from one point to the other. Meanwhile, absorbing that section as part of their big company would help them that when times like this, when certain portions are not performing well of the business, then you have the other section that will create a buffer zone. Thank you for that. And we go to measuring the economic activity. The gross domestic product or the gross domestic income is the basic measure of the country's overall output. The other thing that also plays part in the measurement of the economic activity is the interest. Now, interest is the money that we pay apart from the principal when we borrow the money. The portion that we borrowed will be our principal and it will be returned with interest. We also have the banker's acceptance rate. It's a negotiable instrument or time draft drawn on and accepted by the bank. Before acceptance, the draft is not an obligation of the bank. Then productivity and production. The definition of productivity is a measure of output from a production process per unit of input. Productivity growth is a crucial source of growth in living standards. Second one is defining production. Production refers to physical, non-human inputs used in production, including factories, machines, and tools, along with both infrastructural and capital and/or natural capital. They include two broad categories of projects: instruments of labor, which can be tools, factories, infrastructure, etc., and the subjects of labor, which are the natural resources and the raw materials. Now, people operate the subject of labor using instruments of labor to create a product, or stated another way, labor acting on the means of production creates a product. Now, the explanation of money and its role in the economy. Mr. Hector Achitas defines money as the mean of exchange between individuals. The fundamental purpose of money is a way to distribute the ownership in the society. There are 7 main reasons for decline in money, which are the lower interest rates, the natural disasters or world crisis like the one we are facing right now, your current account deficit, your market confidence. For instance, when investors move their money from one country to the other, the country which they've withdrawn their money from would suffer a blow, and the one they are taking the investment to would have their currency gaining strength. Government responses to situation also stimulate investor responses, which can also affect currency destabilization. The strength of other currencies as compared to your own currency, low savings ratio, etc. What is cyclical movements? When industries and the companies within them are characterized as cyclical or non-cyclical, it is typically, but not always, with respect to the overall business cycle. Demand for industrial products like heavy machinery and consumer durables are affected by macroeconomic conditions, making these sectors cyclical. The bigger picture. The idea behind cyclical and non-cyclical stocks is simple. When money is tight, there is not much you can do. The cyclical stocks represent those items and services for consumers and businesses that they buy when confidence in the economy is high. Non-cyclical stocks or defensive stocks do well in economic downturns, since demand for their products and services continue regardless of the economic position. The classic example of non-cyclical stocks is utilities. Just like now, when we are in this current pandemic, everybody needs water, food, gas, electricity, etc. So this would do well despite any situation that we find ourselves in. In conclusion, it pays to keep an eye on business cycle and know where it is, where it's going. An entrepreneur should understand that this relative safety comes with a price, like everything else in the market, and that is missing growth opportunities in the market. Like Mr. T was saying yesterday, that before buying into business, you need to know exactly what you're doing. That is very important because every business does go through a cycle. So when you venture into buying a portion of any business, you must know where that business is currently at and at what stage of its cycle it is. Otherwise, you run into big mistakes and big losses. Then we come to the different types of businesses. A business, it can be a company or enterprise or a firm, is a legally recognized organization designed to provide goods and or services to consumers. Although forms of business ownerships vary by jurisdiction, there are several common forms. For example, your sole proprietorship, your partnership, corporation, cooperatives, etc. The South African economic growth. South African economy has been growing at an average rate of 0.8% for the past 3 years. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, the South African Reserve Bank estimates that the SA economy will shrink by minus 7% in the 2020 before recovering by about 3.4% in 2021. Now, despite the COVID disruption, the South African economy has been declining for the past 3 years, with 2019 recording a growth rate of 0.2%. Unemployment increased from 26.5% at the end of 2016 to 21.1% at the end of 2018, while the youth unemployment increased from 51% at the end of 2016 to 54.7% at the end of 2018. Skills shortage is one of the main causes. Now, analyzing the trend and the business cycle, it's evident that the South African economic growth is drifting away from the National Development Plan targets of 5.4%. As such, the possibility of South Africa reaching its NDP target by 2030 are less likely. Below are the extracts from the South African policy to develop competitiveness in business. The government recognizes the need for South African companies to compete effectively in the international markets, a task for which a significant size is sometimes essential. With the dominance of global production and exchange, it's now also important to adjust our conceptions of the geographical scope of the markets. The demand of trade and industry commitment to competitiveness is channeled through diverse sections and initiatives. Competitiveness is understood in both domestic and international terms. It must help to make South Africa more competitive by lowering costs along the entire value chain, by assuring neighboring countries of our intention to limit market dominance within the region, and by assuring foreign investors with an environment to do business unimpeded by closed or distorted markets. Monopolies law will prohibit anti-competitive conduct, both explicit and tacit, abuses of dominant market positions, as well as measures and acquisitions which do not serve the public interest. It will also include the possibility of civil remedies for disadvantaged competitors and consumers. Ownership concentrations leading to excessive control over economic activity are also addressed. Additional policy adjustments include the review of securities regulations and institutions associated with corporate structure. Corporate governance practices and regulations, the Harmful Business Practices Act and the Consumer Protection Regulations, and the competitive interface between the public corporations and the private sector. The Black Economic Empowerment in SA was designed to push the country's growth rate by nearly 5% in 2005 on a higher trajectory. It was later replaced by the Broad-Based Economic Empowerment Act 53 of 2003 as amended by Act 46 of 2013. At the core of the policy is the BBEE scorecard, which measures companies' empowerment progress in ownership, management, employment equity, staff training, and direct empowerment. Companies are also encouraged to apply the codes in their interactions with one another, as preferential procurement will affect most private enterprises through the supply chain. Now, the National Development Plan of targeting the year 2030, the NDP was created to eliminate poverty and reduce inequality by the year 2030. The country can achieve this by drawing on skills and capabilities of its people, growing an inclusive economy, building capabilities, enhancing the capacity of the state, and promoting leadership and partnerships throughout society. The NDP during 2010, this 20-year plan was developed with the following targets to achieve in 2030. The economic and employment targets of the NDP include reducing unemployment rate from 24.7% to 6%, and this will will easily be possible when more entrepreneurs come into the front and create the jobs and more opportunities for the unemployed. Growing the economy by 5.4% on an average every year. Adults working in rural areas to increase from 41% to 61%. Increasing the labor participation rate from 55.4% to 65%. Incubation of 2 million people in public employment programs. We come to the South Africa as a gateway to the rest of the African country. Not only is South Africa itself an important emerging economy, it's also the gateway to African markets. The country plays a significant role in supplying the energy, the relief aid, the transport, communications, and investment on the continent. Its well-developed road and rail links provide the platform and infrastructure for ground transportation deep into Africa. Now, below is the pie chart of the South Africa's lion's share of the African market. You can see it's followed by Egypt, Algeria, and the rest goes down. Then we've got South African companies that are operating in the rest of the African countries, in other African countries. For example, you've got your MTN, your SAB Miller, formerly the South African Breweries, the Shoprite Group, which is currently Africa's largest food retailer. Now, South Africa has been fertile soil for new multinational companies, enterprises rooted deep in the country's rich resources and with branches reaching out across the globe. An example is also the Anglo-American Mining Group and other global South African companies. South African company Sasol is one of the largest manufacturer, which is manufacturing oil from coal. Then towards the end and closure, we're just going to do a quick, this is